Please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
The story of Bill Gates, the entrepreneur who democratized technology, is well chronicled. But Bill Gates, the impact investor and philanthropist, perhaps less so. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the world's largest private foundation, was set up in 2000, and as of December 31, 2016, the foundation trust has an endowment of $40.3 billion. In fact, total grant payments since inception through Q4 of 2016 stand at $41.3 billion. The mission of the Gates Foundation is all lives of equal value. In fact, Bill and Melinda call themselves impatient optimists working to reduce inequity. So I decided to visit the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in Seattle to sit down with Bill Gates to talk about the Giving Pledge and his passion and desire to give back to society. We also talked about issues that capture headlines today, from the possibility of a trade war to the need for data privacy regulation, and of course, his thoughts on India. Let me ask you about the Giving Pledge. What's the experience been like in India? You've got, Indians in India who've signed up, but you've got more who are based in the US who've signed up to the Giving Pledge. What are the questions that people are asking you today when you make the pitch to them?
Well, when you join the Giving Pledge, you're not pooling money or picking particular causes. You're simply making a moral commitment that, as somebody who's been hyper successful, the majority of your wealth will go for philanthropic causes. And as everyone who joins sets an example and says, hey, society should expect the super successful to engage in giving back in some way. And hopefully they'll take their talent and their connections, their understanding, and do it in a way that drives innovative new services. We have a lot of Giving Pledge members who have a connection to India. In Dubai, a lot of the members are originally from India, doing a lot of their giving in India. In India itself, we have some amazing people. And then in the US, as you say, a lot of Indians who are here and successful, again, giving back into India. And so when we get together, we talk, how do you give to education in India? Azam Premji has made that his big cause. In fact, amongst the Indian philanthropists, education really sticks out as the number one cause. And yet, because the government's so involved, how do you help the government innovate? How do you do pilot schools? What do you do? Nanda Neelankani has this X step, which I'm very enthused about. It shows a lot of promise to help kids, even very young kids, learn numbers and words. And so we share success stories. We find ways that we can cooperate with each other. It's kind of a movement, a global movement that helps us do more and work with each other. Then India has its own group of the India Philanthropy Initiative, which is a meeting that's done every year, and I've been at most of those. I'm missing the one this year, but that's always been inspiring in terms of new people coming in and making commitment to philanthropy and sharing exactly what they're seeing.
The startup ecosystem in India is exciting at this point in time. Is that something that you would look at in your personal capacity, or through the foundation is something that you may want to sort of invest in, collaborate with?
Well, the foundation, whenever you have new agricultural tools, animal vaccines, better seeds, we on the vaccine side have been a primary funder of a lot of the work by the Indian vaccine companies to encourage them to do new products. We did one of our first big projects was the meningitis A vaccine, which was with serum, and now we've done things like that with about 6 different manufacturers. So whenever it fits the foundation's goals, then we look for the startups and want to help them. But that's purely philanthropic.
One of the big challenges, especially markets like India face today, is joblessness. Employment rates in the US have looked good for at least the last year or so. But the challenge for India is not just the fact that the world is looking insular and what that does to manufacturing and supply chains, but we do have the demographic advantage that we need to now start to capitalize on. In a world of technology and AI and bots, what's the way forward? What would you be concerned about when it comes to job creation in a country like India? Well,
the number one predictor of high-paying jobs is the quality of education. So whether it's malnutrition or how much learning goes on in schools, those are the key issues. Nothing comes close to those key issues. Nothing about AI has anywhere near the impact of, do those kids really learn while they're in primary and secondary school? India over time has developed, even at the university level, a lot of private and public universities that are quite good. And so, are they admitting people on merit? Are they allowed to be innovative? Particularly, what are the policies against those private universities? I'd say that's also more important than anything about AI. Is that higher education level, is the capacity being built, and you avoid a lot of regulations that make it unattractive for that capacity to double or triple, which is, get into the range of what India needs. Certainly trade, will help create high value jobs. And there's a lot of things about land use, labor markets that are pretty basic. Can you compete in manufacturing? Well, if you have certain labor and land laws, you cannot participate in that. And so if people really care about jobs, they really focus on that, perhaps freeing up some of the states to move faster. China does this a lot, where they'll take a policy area that's kind of a national area and they'll free up some regions. And based on that, they'll see if that's the right thing for the country as a whole. So India, because it's lucky enough to have this growing youth population, there are so many things that can be improved that will make sure that the issue is the quality of labor.
One of the challenges that we face, not just in India, but specifically in India at this point in time, is the stigmatization of capital. Post 2008, the world went through this phase where governments responded with more regulation, and industry responded with, a discussion or a debate on capping CEO salaries and so on and so forth. Do you believe that there is a need for not just legislating or mandating a change in corporate behavior, which is what we've done in India, for instance, by bringing in a 2% CSR spend mandatorily, but a change in corporate behavior? I mean, your friend Warren Buffett's talking about the fact that move companies away from quarterly reporting so that they actually focus on the long-term good. What's the way forward, and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the private sector is where you're going to see almost all of the innovation, almost all of the job creation. There are sectors like justice, policing, most of education, where the government is the primary provider. But even in, say, healthcare, it's likely that in India, most of the new capacity, well-run capacity, will come from the private sector. So in some cases, the government will have to be a really smart regulator contracting out with that private sector capacity. There are a lot of innovators. India has, eye care and heart hospitals and things that are the envy of the world. So when the private sector is given the right incentives, given the scale of demand, some good things can happen. In general, India's been more regulatory than most other countries. And in some sectors, that's gone down quite a bit. In some sectors, that still remains the case. Those are political questions. But there's certainly an opportunity to get way more out of the private sector if people are willing to unleash it to a slightly greater degree.
Oh, that's India specific, but globally, I mean, what changes would you like to see in corporate behavior, for instance? Do you think, for instance, that this move towards not focusing or obsessing with quarterly reporting is a good idea?
I don't think that's a gigantic thing. I mean, I do think there are some reforms that would be slightly helpful, but the companies that have done well, these technology companies, they're not focused on quarterly earnings. They're building things that are in 5, 10-year type investment cycles, and that's helped them to do extremely well. My optimism about the future is based on driving innovation. So anything where government R&D is increased, anything where the incentives to the private sector to do more R&D are increased, that's where I see that will surprise people who right now are not seeing the innovation or even worrying, okay, will the innovation actually be a problem in some ways? That R&D piece is where we can surprise people, and the private sector will be a gigantic part of that.
But do you see that the trust deficit is getting in the way of this private-public collaboration, especially when it comes to areas like R&D? And is that holding us back?
Well, I'd say that countries are less anti-market today than they've been in the past. In Africa, part of the reason that Kenya, Ethiopia have done well is they've taken very rigid socialistic policies and unleashed, both in the small business and the large business there, they've unleashed that capacity. So we don't have many people today, saying we should go back to having, politicians pick, this company should make this product and have these limits. Mostly we're in a deregulatory move. Now, every time, somebody gets rich corporately and they haven't benefited their customers, then, it causes people to question that. But the trend is fairly positive. Government is the referee. And so as you reduce government corruption, people's trust that, okay, that referee is there, and the private sector in terms of bids or permits or things like that isn't getting special treatment by the government. You want to build up that kind of trust. And so, people like Transparency International that are really reporting, okay, where is corruption in these various countries? That's an area, even our foundation is anxious to say, okay, government, when it allows corruption, it ends up discrediting the private sector, because unfortunately the private sector will, at least some members, will take advantage if the licensing auction isn't open and properly run.
Let me then talk to you about current issues. We're in the midst of tariffs and retaliatory tariffs, with the US imposing tariffs, China responding, the EU is in on it as well, including India. How do you see the global economy today as we look at political leaders who are perhaps looking more inwards than outwards? What is the impact likely to be on global trade?
Well, the global economy actually is doing quite well right now. The estimates have actually been pushed up a little bit. U.S. growth, China growth, India growth. Those are, it's rare that those are all going fairly well. Certainly these trade issues are scary in that if you get people turning inwards, raising up tariffs, the global economy is not going to do as well. There's huge benefits to trade. If one country is growing too much of a crop, the fact that you can, send it, say, to Africa where it's needed. Otherwise, when you get a bumper crop, then you get a price collapse because you don't have that global demand. And so agriculture's been an area where a number of countries, including India, had to think, okay, how willing are they to be a part of that global trading system.
So, we're not in the midst of a full-blown trade war just yet. What do you believe is likely to be the tipping point?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball on this, but the rhetoric that, okay, we'll use trade tariffs and we'll force somebody to do something, that can escalate. And so, we could end up with a lot of tariffs, and all the plans people have made about assuming their global supply chains will work and that they're able to do exports and imports, that alone will be quite a burden on economic growth and therefore for job creation. And in all of these things, you always have to say, okay, the poorest countries, they're the ones who are just barely getting by. And so it's always interesting to think, how do we avoid them suffering? Even Indian farmers want, their crops to be exportable.
A current debate that's on in India and globally as well around data. Now, you've been an advocate of Aadhaar. You've supported it, you've defended it. And I think that the questions arise not on whether it's a good idea or not, but whether it should be made mandatory for every citizen, for every service possible, because it was envisaged as people accessing government subsidy using the Aadhaar card to avoid duplication and leakages. The question then is that India today is still grappling with putting in place a privacy framework, a privacy regulation, a data protection regulation. In that context, then, does it make sense, even though the matter is in court today, to link Aadhaar to every possible service?
Well, Aadhaar is just something that avoids you pretending to be somebody else. That, you can have, fake people on the government payroll. Aadhaar, prevents you being on that payroll as a ghost worker. It prevents you from collecting things that you shouldn't collect or accessing a health record you shouldn't have access to. So the basic Aadhaar mechanism is an identity mechanism. And so it's too bad if somebody thinks that because Aadhaar is there, that in and of itself creates a privacy problem. The privacy issue is about the application, okay? If you're using Aadhaar for your taxes or your benefits, who has access to that information? The idea that you have an identity, wow, that's only in some weird philosophical thing. That's not it's an arbitrary 12-digit number. It's the policies for the application who can see the land registry, who can, certainly things like voting privacy or medical record privacy, everybody agrees that's super important. Tax records, okay, people will vote, how visible should corporate, what they pay or don't pay, or, individual taxation, is there visibility about those things. So it's strange to see what are legitimate privacy issues being turned into that you should be able to, still have ghost workers on the payroll, that there's a right to have duplicates, which just cost so much money and so much credibility. Even the various things that have gone to Aadhaar, cutting out the middleman, there's no credibility when the rich people end up taking these benefit programs and being able to capture all the money. The inefficiency is so unjust, and so now a lot of that fraud, for the programs that have adopted it, isn't there. So huge upside if people care about government quality.
But since you do, if data is now the new commodity, if data is the new oil, and we're still trying to put in place a privacy architecture, we've got the GDPR rules that have just been rolled out across Europe. What's your sense on regulation and its impact on the way we deal with technology in light of the new regulations?
Well, certainly there will be privacy regulations about your medical record, your tax record, those things. That's all, an absolutely fine thing. GDPR is more about how the private sector deals with your records. There'll be other rules that have to do how the government deals with your records. The government, in some cases, has access to things that are even more sensitive, because of their role in healthcare. So I don't see appropriate regulation as slowing down if people are rational about it. It won't slow down the adoption of these digital tools.